For the first time now in the story of Joseph, things are beginning to look up in a consistent way. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and the cupbearer had suddenly remembered Joseph after 2 years of forgetting him. And he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Now that is remarkable, isn't it? Joseph had shared those 2 dreams that he had when he was a young man. No sense of what they meant, no sense of it being from the Lord, just shared it with his family and upset everybody big time, and his father was offended. He then had confidence to interpret the 2 dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, having said that dreams are fulfilled by the Lord. What's gone on in the meantime? Where's this come from? We just don't know. There's elements of this story I'd love to ask Joseph about, but he's absolutely confident that God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And let's face it, he's now standing before probably the most powerful man on the planet at the time. You've got to be confident that God is going to show up and do that if you're going to make that claim before him. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream I saw 7 ears of corn, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other ears sprouted, withered and thin, and scorched by the east wind. The thin ears of corn swallowed up the 7 good ears. I told this to the musicians, but none of them could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of corn are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless ears of corn, scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So Joseph had 2 dreams as a young man, and surely, according to the same pattern, it meant that it was given to show that the matter has been firmly decided by God, but it certainly hasn't happened soon. And yet Joseph is able to stand with confidence before this man and say, these 2 dreams are the same, and you've got them in duplicate, because God is committed to this, and it's going to happen soon. That's remarkable trust and faith, isn't it? There's so much we don't understand here, but Joseph has confidence in God through these dreams that he's going to show up and do something. Even though at this moment, the follower of this God, Joseph, is in prison, in a land where nowhere else believes, far from home, with his own situation in a mess. That's trust. That's confidence. But more than that, Joseph not only delivers the interpretation of the dream, he now goes on to give advice. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So not only is Joseph interpreting the dream, but now he's given advice. He's not been asked for this. This is not part of the dream. But he's delivering this very sage and wise advice. You've got 7 good years. You've been given warning of this by God. Isn't that kind? To be followed by 7 bad years. So let's make the most of the 7 good years. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. Now let's face it, Potiphar had found this wisdom in Joseph in his household. And the captain of the prison too had found this same wisdom in Joseph, and he'd risen in both of those places to serve well. And now it's been recognised by Pharaoh too. You should be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He made him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, Make way! Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. Joseph is now the most powerful man in the land aside from Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is basically saying, I am Pharaoh, you're not, but actually what you say goes. I've appointed you to this position of responsibility. Wow. He was in prison just a few moments ago, and now he's the most powerful man in the land. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and travelled throughout Egypt. Just pause there for a moment. So as a young man, Joseph, perhaps, we don't know, it's not commented on, was unwise or made mistakes with his own dreams and the way he behaved in his family. He's been through a really tough time, a hard school of discipline and learning. And now at 30 he's ready to serve. Now this is really significant. The Levites start at 30. I think it's recorded that David and Saul start their reign at 30. Jesus starts his ministry at 30. There is something about having to learn the hard knocks of life, to learn through the brokenness and difficulties, to be ready to serve. And Joseph's now at a place of maturity, ready to serve Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Nothing magic about the number 30. It is significant that it occurs so many times in Scripture, but it's not as though suddenly at 30 a little clock ticks and we're suddenly full of wisdom. But there is a sense of maturity here. And Joseph is now able to go and serve. It's a reminder, isn't it, that we can't expect maturity from those who are young. They might be wise and godly, and yet still be immature in their behaviour. Mature decisions come from those who have experienced life and have grown in God's ways. During the 7 years of abundance then, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records, because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipherah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and said, It is because God has made me forget all my trouble, and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim, and said, It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Forgotten and fruitful are the names of his 2 sons. All the hatred of his brothers and the animosity in the household he grew up in, all the difficulties and all the memories, the being in the pit and then discussing going to kill him and then selling him, all of that horror, he's forgotten now in this moment as he is suddenly now ruling in Egypt. But more than just forgotten, he's now fruitful. This is the land of his suffering. Don't make any mistake, he was a slave here, he's been falsely accused, he's been put in prison, he's had a miserable time in Egypt. But now he's fruitful. Now he's in a position where he can help others and serve them. And who's done this? Can you see that in both names? God has made. God has made. It's the Lord's doing. It's not Joseph. It's not his greatness. It's what the Lord has done through him. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. What a remarkable chapter, from prison to effectively Prime Minister. From serving faithfully in a prison where he had been forgotten, to now serving faithfully in the land where now everybody knew him. and it's what God had done with his life. Now, there's no promise here for us that we are going to be saviours in our world, that we are going to be all elevated to some prominent position in this world. We can read into this unhelpfully, but we do need to do two things. We need to see how this points us to Jesus from the grave to the right hand of the Father, from in Philippians 2 being obedient even to death on the cross, to being raised by the Father so that every knee would bow. We're seeing how Jesus himself would come and rescue his people through his suffering and be raised to bring abundance. But also we see that all those who follow Jesus in faithfulness follow on that grace curve. We might only ever take up our cross and deny ourselves in this world. But when Jesus comes again, he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful in these things, now be fruitful in the many." And we see here then a principle of what God is doing in our lives. The challenges that we need to face, the lessons that we need to learn, the wisdom that needs to be gained. So we rejoice in how Joseph points us to Jesus, but we also find great help in how we can find hope in our own circumstances and in our own stories as we look to what Jesus does for us as we follow in his footsteps. May that encourage you